With Trump, he doesn't know anything about Russia at all. And nobody around him knows anything about Russia. There are no Russian experts. The CIA's top Russian man or person, could be a female nowadays, is driven by, because you don't get to be the CIA's top Russian person today by being a genuine expert in Russia. You get it by playing the ideological game. It means that somewhere along the line, you went and got an advanced degree and you wrote a thesis that said Vladimir Putin is an evil autocrat and the enemy of democracy. That's what Fiona Hill did. This Andrea Taylor person did. This is what they all do. Oh, you're perfect. Come in and work for the CIA. They don't know anything about Russia, but we don't do it. We don't engage. We don't talk with them. So we're ignorant about them. Donald Trump is hostage to a system. Now we're a bunch of Russophile or Russophobic. Trump has doomed himself to failure.
In the background of a world distracted by Middle East tensions, Ukraine finds itself on the brink of a fresh disaster. On the 19th of June, 2,025 Russian forces converged from the west and northeast around Pokrovsk, Mirnograd threatening to pinch off a massive Ukrainian defensive pocket. This is no small skirmish. It could mean collapse in Donbass. To fully grasp the danger, imagine Russia cutting supply lines to that region, while also ramping up missile strikes and drone attacks elsewhere. Meanwhile, American priorities have tilted toward Israel and Iran, leaving Ukraine out in the cold. At the G7 summit on the 17th of June, US President Trump abruptly departed, forgoing a meeting with Zelensky, a symbolic snub, but one that speaks volumes. Scott Ritter once warned, technology doesn't win wars. Mastery of that technology does. And mastery now depends not only on weapons and drones, but on global attention, logistics, and political will. Watch closely, because what happens next may define the fate of Ukraine's eastern resistance. Feel free to drop your thoughts in the comments below. On the 19th of June 2025, the Russian military launched one of its most strategically coordinated operations in months, striking both the western and northeastern edges of the Pokrovsk-Mirnograd urban zone. This was not a random attack nor a probing maneuver. It was a calculated effort to sever Ukrainian defense networks and trap thousands of soldiers in what may soon be known as the Second Great Encirclement of Donbass. Villages like Novo-Ekonomichesko and Novomykolaivka, once seen as buffer zones, have now fallen under Russian control. And areas between Yalta, Filia, and Grushevsky have also been overrun, forming a crescent of control that stretches ominously toward Pokrovsk's supply corridors. The target is clear: the E50 road, a critical artery that links Pokrovsk and Mirnograd to Ukrainian resupply hubs near Pavlograd. Once that lifeline is severed, Ukrainian units inside will find themselves cut off under fire and forced either to retreat under bombardment or face capture. This is part of what Moscow terms its summer offensive, but it's less an offensive and more a slow vice grip, one that tightens every day. Military Summary, a Russian-aligned reporting channel, and the map analysts at Suryak Maps both confirmed that Russia has extended its lines toward Konstantinovka, Dolzhenko, and the flanks of Kupiansk have been absorbed. Clashes are intensifying in Toretsk and Ilyanovskaya, but what's most telling are the numbers from Ukraine's own general staff. In a single day, the 18th of June, they logged 136 Russian assaults, 32 airstrikes, 43 precision-guided bombs, over 900 kamikaze drones, and more than 3,000 artillery strikes. That is not a skirmish. That is a sustained industrial-scale bombardment, the kind designed to break not only bunkers, but morale. And that morale is wavering. Ukrainian troops in Pokrovsk now face a wall of fire on multiple axes. Russian forces are not engaging head-on against hardened defenses. They're outflanking them, probing junctions, cutting communication trenches. As the so-called thousand-cut strategy spreads across the front, Pokrovsk is beginning to feel like a cauldron, with the lid slowly clamping down. One successful envelopment here and the entire northern Donetsk line could collapse inward. This isn't just a tactical loss Ukraine is facing. It's symbolic. Pokrovsk is more than a node on a map. It represents the remaining spine of resistance in Donetsk Oblast. Its loss would mean a chain reaction. Konstantinovka, Toretsk, perhaps even deeper territory would be exposed. And in Kiev, that possibility is sparking alarm, because as this vice tightens, every hour without reinforcement, without resupply, and without external intervention makes survival less probable and defeat more likely. As Russia encircles Pokrovsk, simultaneous pressure is building across multiple fronts, and Ukraine is desperately trying to plug every hole. While Pokrovsk garners international attention, a quiet unraveling is taking place across the wider eastern theater. Kupiansk, a vital logistics hub, is now encircled. Dolzhenko, previously held by Ukrainian units, has fallen after a collapse in rear communications. The shockwaves from this loss are spreading across the neighboring sectors. Russian troops are now exploiting gaps in the Toretsk-Konstantinovka line, pushing through key waterways and establishing forward positions around Bila Hora. The battles in Kalinov and Alexandro are no longer artillery duels. They are street fights. Ukrainian outposts are being battered by layered artillery fire and followed up with coordinated infantry sweeps. According to data visualized by Suryak maps, Russian forces have launched a secondary axis of advance from Novosergivka heading toward Dnipropetrovsk, a move that, if successful, would flank the rear of both Konstantinovka and Toretsk. This isn't blitzkrieg. It's erosion, each town eroded until the larger structure falls. The battlefield is not defined by sweeping maneuvers, but by the slow, deliberate grinding of layered offenses. The so-called thousand-cut strategy is proving far more effective than most analysts in the West had imagined. Further south gains around Muravka have forced Ukrainian troops to abandon homes and defensive structures alike. These are not isolated victories. They form a pattern, a slow, methodical isolation of Ukraine's entire eastern military apparatus. Rodovka reports confirm that Russian units are now preparing to assault deeper nodes using Novosergivka as a launch point, a clear indication that Moscow's ambitions go well beyond mere defensive consolidation. Even local geography is turning against Kyiv. River crossings, supply bottlenecks, and fractured road systems have hindered Ukrainian reinforcement efforts. And while Ukraine continues to rotate forces between depleted units, Russia is throwing fresh battalions into these flashpoints with increasing confidence. Add to this the staggering financial drain. Ukraine is using missiles that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to repel waves of cheap drones. That arithmetic simply doesn't add up. With logistics strained, morale frayed, and fronts faltering, the central question becomes not whether Russia will break through, but where it will break through first. With fronts unraveling near Kupiansk and Toretsk, Ukraine now faces a bleak strategic map and increasingly thin options. In this war, the battlefield isn't the only place where lines are drawn. More and more they're found on spreadsheets in the cost of one missile, one drone, 1 square kilometer of terrain. Ukraine now faces a cold, brutal arithmetic. A single interceptor like the Patriot PAC-3 or IRIS-T can run upwards of 150,000 US dollars. And yet, what is it shooting down? Often it's a V-2U drone costing around $3,000. Multiply that by hundreds of nightly attacks, and you see a financial hemorrhage no country, especially not one, dependent on foreign aid, can sustain indefinitely. And that's just drones. Russian missile strikes have gotten more precise. The Iskander system, a key part of Moscow's tactical doctrine, was used recently to wipe out an entire Ukrainian field brigade near Sumy, according to local reports. These aren't just bombs dropped for intimidation, they're calculated strikes with devastating cost effectiveness. Russia is no longer lobbing shells en masse, hoping to hit something. It's sending smart weapons into weak points and getting maximum return per launch. Meanwhile, Ukraine's defense ministry is forced to ration everything from air defenses to artillery shells. Reports from The Guardian on the 17th of June confirmed that President Trump abruptly left the G7 summit, refocusing U.S. strategic attention on the Israel-Iran conflict. Ukraine, once a darling of Western media, is now struggling to stay relevant amid shifting priorities. The result? A thinning trickle of aid, delayed weapons, transfers, and growing hesitation among NATO members to dip deeper into their own reserves. This was echoed by Viktor Medvedchuk, a controversial but outspoken Ukrainian politician who wrote in the 18th of June op-ed that Washington's policy is now dictated by economic anxiety more than principle. His warning is blunt: if Kyiv remains dependent on a West losing interest, it will find itself in a losing position on every front. Russia, by contrast, is adapting. It's not just about what they're firing, it's about how they're building. Drone factories are operating around the clock using technology acquired through third parties or built indigenously. Their V-2U units don't rely on GPS or satellite control. They're pre-programmed, autonomous, and cheap enough to deploy in waves. It's quantity and quality at once. As retired U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer Scott Ritter once put it, in modern war, logistics is more important than tactics. And logistics at this point is where Ukraine is losing ground fastest. Russia's war machine is turning out cheap weapons by the truckload, while Ukraine fights over every single Western shipment. The war has turned into a balance sheet. Every drone, every missile, every gallon of diesel counts. And while Ukraine continues to run deficits in ammunition and morale and international attention, Russia is shifting into surplus. The question isn't just who wins the battle, it's who can afford to keep fighting. And when money runs out faster than munitions, influence becomes the final frontier, on and off the battlefield. While front lines shift and missiles fly, something quieter but equally potent is taking shape, a diplomatic realignment that could redefine the post-war global order. On the 17th of June, Russian Security Council Secretary Sergei Shoigu landed in Pyongyang. His mission, not just ceremonial, Shoigu met with Kim Jong-un to discuss arms cooperation and economic collaboration, including reconstruction support for the Kursk region, a war-affected province in western Russia. This isn't just about two pariah states shaking hands. It's a new blueprint for forged partnerships outside the Western sphere, where energy, arms, and logistics flow without lectures on democracy or human rights. While Brussels drafts legislation to ban Russian gas imports by 2027, Moscow is signing energy deals with nations that don't view geopolitics through the lens of Eurocentrism. At the same time, London's newest sanctions targeting Russia's so-called shadow fleet try to cut oil revenues, but it's a game of cat and mouse. These tankers swap flags, change owners, reroute through secondary ports. Russian oil still flows quietly, efficiently, and profitably. Inside Ukraine, the situation is starkly different. Red Cross-led exchanges of fallen soldiers between Kyiv and Moscow, while noble, are a reminder that diplomacy has been reduced to logistics of grief. Ukraine, once holding center stage at Western summits, is now handling humanitarian formalities while hoping the next aid tranche arrives on time. Moscow, meanwhile, is looking east. The deals it's crafting now, oil for tech agreements, joint military exercises, infrastructure pacts, are not just survivalist. They are preparatory for a world where Western dominance isn't a given, a world where Russia's resilience, not its rhetoric, becomes the model for power realignment. As Shoigu shook hands with Kim Jong-un, he wasn't just cementing a defense pact. He was signaling an ideological divorce from the Euro-Atlantic framework. These aren't stunts for headlines. They're rehearsals for a post-Western architecture of power. And again, the West is mostly watching, busy with domestic elections, inflation, or the Middle East. There's no NATO pivot to counter Moscow's eastern flank, no new Marshall Plan for Kyiv, just statements, summits, and spreadsheets. And once again, as Scott Ritter warned years ago, you can't wage a war of attrition if you're the one running out of time. And time for Ukraine and its allies is starting to feel like the rarest commodity of all. So what happens when the West steps back and Moscow's eastern arms reach forward? The war in Ukraine has entered a new phase one, defined not just by firepower, but by global distractions, economic math, and diplomatic pivoting. On the 19th of June, Russian forces nearly encircled Pokrovsk. Kyiv has lost ground across Kupiansk, Toretsk, Konstantinovka. Aid from the US falters, while Russia builds eastern alliances and cheap war machines. The future, not battlefield breakthroughs, but slow, structural attrition. Victory won't be declared by winning a single town. It will be claimed by enduring longer and spending less. Russia understands this new battlefield. Ukraine now finds itself playing catch-up. Scott Ritter's second warning is clear. Mastery of technology, not the technology itself, wins wars. Moscow's structural mastery over economics, alliances, and attrition is visible. The rest world stands by spectators to a power shift growing in quiet but irreversible increments. If you've stayed until the end, leave a comment. Is Ukraine's defense admirable or doomed? How long can global attention hold before this war becomes a forgotten graveyard of alliances? Let's discuss.
That once Russia commits to something, they don't come back. Zelensky was in Germany and he had to leave because the Russians had broken through in Sumy. The Russians ain't quitting. This counteroffensive, it's going to be about not just the buffer zone, but it's going to be about new territories as well. And the Russians have the resources to do this. And remember, every day that the Ukrainians get weaker, the Russians get stronger. That 175,000 men that they mobilized, these aren't combat replacements because Russia isn't suffering those kind of casualties. These are the troops that are going into two new armies that have been equipped, trained, and prepared to be brought in for the next wave of offensive. So we're talking about Russia having the ability to deploy upwards of 200,000 troops where they see fit. And Ukraine doesn't have the ability to match that.
What if restraint were no longer a virtue, but a trap? On June 18th, two fronts are burning in Ukraine. Russian forces have shattered Kyiv's defenses along the Mokry-Yaly riverbend in southern Donbass, forcing Kyiv to retreat under fire. At the same time, Moscow launched hundreds of UAVs and multiple ballistic missiles at Kyiv, with Ukraine only responding with a 200 drone counterassault. Meanwhile, the Middle East is on the verge. Israel and Iran continue heavy reprisals, prompting former US President Trump to abruptly leave the G7 summit in Canada and even threaten Iran's unconditional surrender. Scott Ritter warned, you can't deter what you don't understand. It's a moment of jarring contradictions, massive attacks during peace. Stay with us and leave your thoughts below, because in today's world, every malfunction in diplomacy might end in disaster. On Tuesday, June 18th, the front line in southern Donbass witnessed what many are now calling a decisive breach. Russian forces launched a multi-vector offensive that shattered Ukraine's defensive belt at the strategic bend of the Mokry-Yaly River. According to the military channel Ryadovka, supported by geolocated footage from the area, Ukrainian positions in the villages of Bogadar, Otradnoye, and Komar collapsed within hours. There was no prolonged resistance, no last stand, just a retreat swift and unceremonious. Russian armed forces, or Rafaf, executed a well-coordinated thrust between the Mokry and Volcha rivers. Their goal was clear punch through the junction that connects Donetsk to the interior routes of Dnipropetrovsk, and they succeeded. Kyiv's troops, overstretched and lacking reserves, were pushed across the river line under the cover of scattered defensive obstructions. As one local observer noted, it was less a battle, more an evacuation under pressure. But the battlefield was not limited to trenches and tree lines. That same night, Russia launched a massive aerial bombardment on Ukraine's capital. Nearly 500 unmanned aerial vehicles and several ballistic missiles struck military targets throughout Kyiv. Video evidence captured the haunting silhouette of drones buzzing past the city's skyline. Ukraine's response: a deployment of roughly 200 UAVs, a desperate but coordinated attempt to repel the barrage. The military summary channel emphasized this was not a random spike in hostilities. This was calculated, a signal, a combination of deep tactical pressure in the south merged with psychological shock in the heart of Ukraine's leadership. For Ukraine, the losses at Mokryali marked not just a tactical withdrawal, but a systemic collapse in one of their better prepared defense sectors. In response, Kyiv is reportedly shifting its fallback position to a line stretching from Novopavlovka in the north to Velikomikhailovka in the south. This makes use of the Volcha River's natural barriers. However, such a move reveals something deeper. The era of mobile defense may be over. Ukraine's planners now face a brutal arithmetic, where bodies and artillery shells simply don't add up to viable resistance. And behind this entire campaign lies a chilling truth. This wasn't just about capturing a riverbend. It was about proving that Ukrainian logistics, morale, and Western backing are not limitless. As Scott Ritter once said, you can't deter what you don't understand. And clearly, the West still doesn't understand Russia's new model of war. Tomorrow's lines on the map may move, but today's crisis is more than territorial, it's structural. While the headlines may scream about broken lines and collapsing villages, the deeper war is unfolding elsewhere, quietly, methodically, and with devastating impact. In the Zaporizhia and Pokrovsk sectors, the Russian military has shifted from sweeping offensives to a grinding campaign of attrition. According to official data from the Ukrainian General Staff, June 17th saw an extraordinary tempo of violence. There were 155 reported engagements in a single day, 53 clashes in Pokrovsk, 28 around Kursk, and another 20 near Novopavlovsk. But it was the tools used, not just the numbers, that told the real story. 7 missiles, 23 airstrikes, 33 guided bombs, over 1,100 loitering drones, and a staggering 4,599 artillery strikes were conducted by Russian forces. Within a 24-hour window, this is no longer a series of military operations, it is industrial-scale warfare, the type of campaign that wears down not just defenses but entire defense doctrines. What makes Russia's approach unique is its pivot away from static fronts toward mobile layered pressure. Instead of chasing every trench or street, Moscow is targeting arteries, waterways, supply depots, relay stations. Using what analysts now call the axial disruption strategy, they're deliberately destabilizing key tactical areas, not for control but for exhaustion. This approach allows them to push Ukraine into reaction mode over and over again. And each time Ukraine mobilizes its reserves, Russia hits its energy grid, its supply hubs, or its armored convoys, gathering for counterstrikes. It's an orchestra of destruction conducted with uncanny timing, and it works not just because of what Russia hits, but when, according to Reuters, the cumulative toll on Ukraine's army has grown more visible: reduced troop rotations, long delays in equipment repair, dwindling drone stockpiles, and increased reports of soldiers refusing orders at secondary fronts. Meanwhile, satellite images show Russia consolidating gains on high ground and maintaining supply corridors through even contested zones. In this campaign, the goal is not to take territory, it is to take capacity, and that's why, as Scott Ritter put it, Russia doesn't need to win quickly, it just needs to not lose, because over time, it is the side that stays coherent politically, militarily, and economically that defines victory in modern war. What you're witnessing isn't chaos, it's slow motion collapse under calibrated pressure. While Russian forces push deep into Donbass, the Middle East ignites in parallel. Between June 14th and 16th, the region witnessed one of its most dangerous escalations in years. According to Reuters and various regional defense observers, Israel launched what it later called Operation Rising Lion, a massive multi-pronged air campaign involving approximately 200 fighter jets, UAVs deployed by Mossad, satellite-guided missiles. The targets Iranian missile silos, underground enrichment facilities at Natanz, and hardened command bunkers in Tehran, allegedly linked to the IRGC. In total, over a dozen key military sites across Iran were struck in less than 6 hours. While Tel Aviv initially denied responsibility, footage from social media and eyewitness accounts painted a different picture of bright orange flashes above hardened compounds and the unmistakable roar of jet engines slicing through the skies over Isfahan, Qom, and Tehran. The United States, while not confirming direct involvement, reportedly evacuated sensitive personnel from facilities in northern Iraq the day prior. Iran responded swiftly but not symmetrically. 65 ballistic missiles and over 30 suicide drones targeted Israeli civilian and military zones, including Tel Aviv and Haifa. According to reports from regional outlets and partially confirmed by Western intelligence leaks, 8 Israeli civilians were killed, dozens injured, and the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv suffered partial structural damage. Israel's Iron Dome system intercepted most threats, but not all. For once, the retaliatory balance appeared less one-sided than previous skirmishes. Then came the diplomatic explosion. On June 17th, former President Donald Trump, attending the G7 summit in Canada, abruptly left, citing the Iran crisis as an urgent national security matter. It marked the first early departure of a U.S. head of state from a G7 summit due to an external war event. But what followed was even more notable. The G7 failed to release a joint statement on Ukraine. Sources quoted by Reuters claimed the U.S. objected to language pressing for further sanctions on Russia, drawing a sharp line between public posturing and private calculations. In a single weekend, Israel and Iran edged closer to open warfare. The U.S. and G7 showed hesitation, and Russia stayed quiet, focused, and watched the global chessboard shift, because when two fires burn at once, the one with clearer objectives always wins. Two wars, one pattern attack first, justify later. As two war zones heat up Donbass and the Gulf, the question isn't what the West will do, but whether it even knows what it's doing. With Ukraine under pressure and Iran under fire, Western leaders oscillate between rhetoric and retreat. In Canada at the G7, the clearest signal wasn't solidarity, but splintering. Despite pressure from European partners like France and Germany, the United States refused to endorse a joint statement calling for harsher sanctions on Moscow. That decision, subtle as it seems, speaks volumes about changing priorities. According to internal G7 sources cited by Reuters, President Trump was unimpressed with suggestions to increase pressure on Putin and instead pushed for language focused on Iran. Behind closed doors, he even referenced Senator Lindsey Graham's draft bill proposing conditional diplomacy with Moscow. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, who arrived expecting a high-profile endorsement, left with military aid, promises but no public support from the G7 as a collective. There was no handshake with Trump, no high-level bilateral, and most critically, no signal of unified deterrence. Instead, what the West offered Ukraine was ambiguity, and ambiguity kills resolve. Washington and Berlin publicly claim non-involvement in drone attacks on Russian territory, but reports indicate otherwise. The Patriot air defense systems have not only appeared inside Ukraine, but have been operationalized. The Taurus missiles, despite Germany's denials, are reportedly being deployed under the guise of technical assistance or training programs. NATO advisors are not just sitting in control rooms, they are reportedly embedded near the front, guiding surveillance and logistics. It's not open warfare. It's warfare with plausible deniability. Meanwhile, in the backdrop, Russia continues its war of attrition. Every drone strike on a logistics hub, every missile lobbed at a Ukrainian power grid node adds another brick to the wall of cumulative dominance. The goal isn't shocking, it's structure, and that's exactly what the West lacks. As former weapons inspector Scott Ritter once warned, time is a weapon too. Russia understands that, well, it isn't trying to end the war in headlines, it's trying to end it in exhaustion. In this global contest of wills, only one side is staying the course. June 18th may not mark the end of war, but it marks a shift in posture. In southern Donbass, Russian momentum is building. In the Middle East, the Israel-Iran war overshadows Ukraine at the G7. Somehow, the West still pretends ignorance, but the pattern is clear. Russia is not reacting in desperation. It is imposing a season of reckoning. If restraint becomes a weapon, then its wielders must be ready to lose. Because in this war of attrition, the silent strategist wins, not the loudest. Scott Ritter reminds us, you can't deter what you don't understand. Call to action. What do you think? Is Russia just reasserting sanity, or is the risk getting real?
I think it's important for everyone to realize, especially in Moscow, that strikes will not win the Ukraine war for Russia. All the targets they picked to attack were legitimate. They all did severe damage, and they will have military impact on the ability of the Ukrainians to do very much. But it's not going to end the war. But in terms of the battlefield, the war is over. The Russians have won. But strategically, the war continues and will continue as long as Zelensky is there in Kiev with his little inner circle, and they pretend to be a functional government, and they will do that as long as we in Washington send them cash and military equipment. So the question is, what are you going to do about this, President Putin?
What if a war could be altered not with stealth bombers or tanks, but by $3, zero worth of plastic batteries and explosives? On the 1st of June, 2025, Ukraine claimed to have struck a third of Russia's strategic bomber fleet in a single night using swarms of first-person view drones in an audacious operation called Spider's Web. The Western media celebrated, calling it a tactical miracle, but was it? Behind the headlines lie months of clandestine planning, satellite, dodging convoys, and political moves with billion-dollar stakes. The Ukrainian president boasted, the Russians denied, but in the silence of remote air bases and the shadows of satellite photos, the truth hangs like smoke from a burnt runway. In the words of retired Colonel Douglas McGregor, in modern war, victory belongs not to those who shoot first, but to those who prepare in silence. So what really happened? And did Ukraine's cheap drones really change the tide? Stick around and don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments, because this war isn't fought only in trenches, but also in truths. On the morning of the 1st of June, 2025, Ukraine announced what it called a breakthrough in modern warfare in a carefully coordinated aerial assault dubbed Operation Spider's Web. Ukrainian forces launched 117 low-cost FPV drones against 4 major Russian air bases, striking deep into enemy territory. The targets, according to Ukrainian officials, included high-value military infrastructure, long-range strategic bombers like the Tuesday 95 and Tuesday 22 M3, along with at least one A-50 early warning aircraft. The reported result, a staggering 41 aircraft damaged or destroyed, accounting, they claimed, for 34% of Russia's strategic bomber fleet. President Volodymyr Zelensky, speaking in an exclusive interview with ABC News, didn't mince words. He described the damage as a blow not only to Russian firepower, but to its morale. We have destroyed 34% of their strategic bombers, he stated, noting that the aircraft Russia used to target Ukrainian civilians were now burning wrecks. He estimated the total cost of the destruction to Russia to be over $7 billion. And he stressed a key point. Ukraine had used no imported drones. We only used what we made ourselves, Zelensky said proudly. He added that to ensure operational secrecy, the drones had been smuggled into Russian territory inside wooden huts mounted on civilian trucks. These trucks were operated by unsuspecting civilian drivers who, according to Ukraine, had no idea of the mission's real purpose. Each hut was rigged to open remotely, revealing and launching FPV drones precisely timed for coordinated strikes. The Ukrainian security service, known as the SBU, took full credit for the operation. According to internal estimates shared by Kyiv officials, half of the damaged aircraft were beyond repair, while the rest would require months to return to service. The sophistication of the mission stunned both supporters and skeptics. General Vasyl Malyuk, the head of SBU, was reported to have overseen the operation personally, with a team working in secret for 18 months to stage the ambush. Ukraine's drone strategy has grown rapidly over the past year. According to presidential advisor Alexander Kimison, Ukrainian manufacturers can now produce up to 5 million FPV drones annually. The FPV, or first-person view drone, has become Ukraine's weapon of choice, not because of power, but because of price. Each unit costs under $3,000. A fraction of the $250 million needed to produce a single strategic bomber. From an economic standpoint, the attack made headlines around the world. From a psychological standpoint, it rocked the traditional assumptions of air power. Western media quickly amplified Ukraine's claims. Outlets such as Reuters and The Guardian hailed the operation as a technological leap, a David versus Goliath moment where cheap smart devices humiliated one of the largest air forces in the world. On social media, the footage of drones skimming treetops and slamming into distant hangars became viral sensations. For Zelensky's government, it was not just a military victory, it was a PR masterstroke. But beneath the applause, one question lingered. Was this truly the turning point it seemed to be, or merely a well-staged illusion meant to maintain Western support? And while Kyiv celebrated what it called a revolution in warfare, Moscow was preparing its own version of the story, and it came with far fewer fireworks. Just 4 days later, on the 5th of June, Russia broke its silence. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov gave a televised statement dismissing Ukraine's claims outright. Yes, some aircraft sustained damage, he admitted in a reserved tone, but they will be repaired. None of the core capabilities have been compromised. Speaking through the state outlet, TASS Ryabkov added that media reports exaggerated the impact. He called the Ukrainian figures speculative and detached from reality. In short, Russia's official stance was that the attack happened, but it was far from decisive. The Russian Ministry of Defense, true to its usual policy, released no visual evidence, no images of damaged aircraft, no casualty numbers, no satellite photos, only a vague statement that operations were continuing as planned. But for many observers, the silence spoke volumes. Was Moscow hiding a major embarrassment or simply downplaying a minor incident? In the information, war certainty is elusive. The Kyiv Independent, a Western-aligned Ukrainian outlet, admitted they could not independently verify the claim that 41 aircraft had been destroyed. Instead, they quoted open-source intelligence groups, which estimated the number at closer to 21. These estimates were based on commercial satellite imagery and ground-level reports. While still a considerable blow, the gap between 21 and 41 raises the possibility that Ukraine may have embellished the scale of the success for Western ears. Yet regardless of which number is correct, the consequences were immediate. Russia began reinforcing its remaining air bases with radar-guided cannons and electronic jamming systems. The costs were not just monetary, they were strategic. Aircraft were relocated, runways restructured, defense crews reassigned. According to analysts cited by the Times, Russian bomber deployment became more cautious in the days that followed. It was no longer about the actual losses, but the demonstrated vulnerability. This is a tactic as old as modern warfare. From World War II to Vietnam, militaries have understood one brutal truth: planes are easier to destroy when they're on the ground. In North Africa, British SAS units used jeeps and timed explosives to destroy hundreds of German aircraft parked under the desert sun. In Vietnam, guerrilla fighters would strike U.S. airbases with mortars and demolition charges, causing disproportionate chaos with minimal effort. What Ukraine did with drones in 2025 was not new. It was history recycled with battery packs and radio signals. But there is a modern twist. Back then, these attacks took weeks to plan and dozens of men to execute. Today, it takes a truck, a few laptops, and some off-the-shelf components. That's what makes it terrifying. Not because it changes the battlefield, but because it lowers the barrier to entry. Every future war, no matter how advanced, will now have to plan for this cheap, precise form of chaos. And as history repeated itself with a modern upgrade, Russia's next move would make one thing clear: the age of cheap war ends when the first hypersonic missile takes flight. Operation Spider's Web was far more than a precision strike. It was a signal flare for a new era of warfare. While Kyiv hailed it as a tactical victory, military observers around the globe took note of something deeper. This was not just a story about 117 drones hitting 41 aircraft. It was about the transformation of battlefield logic. For the first time in the 21st century, a mid-sized power had inflicted billions in damage on a nuclear superpower using tools that cost less than a second-hand car. It was as if military history had hit the reset button. Zelensky's top security advisor, Alexander Kimison, later revealed that Ukraine had ramped up production to 5 million FPV drones annually. 5 million. These devices, equipped with small explosive payloads and controlled through goggles or screens, can fly below radar and under the range of conventional anti-air systems. They don't need airfields. They don't need pilots. They don't even need satellite uplinks. What they need is surprise and just enough guidance to find an aircraft or hangar and detonate. The FPV drones were not launched from Ukrainian soil. They were transported piece by piece into Russian territory over 18 months, hidden inside fake cabins mounted on civilian trucks. Remote-controlled roofs swung open and swarms of drones lifted off from seemingly harmless platforms. According to Ukrainian claims, drivers didn't even know what they were hauling. This was not just war. It was a spy thriller written in plastic and circuitry. After the attack, Russia didn't scream. It responded the Russian way: calm, deliberate, but thorough. According to military analysis published by the Times, Russian forces began redistributing strategic bombers across secondary airfields, installing radar-guided 30mm autocannons, building earth berms, and reinforcing hangars. The upgrades didn't come cheap, but they came quickly. It was a tacit admission. Yes, Ukraine had hit hard, and yes, Russia was now adapting. Colonel Douglas Macgregor once observed, "In war, technology matters, but only when used by those who understand the terrain of the mind." Ukraine understood that terrain, at least for a moment. They struck not just bombers, but confidence. A fleet of 40 aircraft might recover, but shaken command psychology is harder to restore. Yet the danger with asymmetrical warfare is also this: it provokes a symmetrical response. When one side uses pinprick strikes to disrupt, the other side often escalates to restore balance. Ukraine may have changed the tempo, but in doing so, they also set the stage for what came next. But while Ukraine claimed a win in the sky, Russia's answer would come from above with precision, velocity, and vengeance. On the 8th of June, 2025, just 1 week after the drone blitz, Russia launched a full-scale aerial counteroffensive. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't surgical, it was saturation warfare. Moscow fired 33 missiles in a single night. The arsenal included Kinzhal hypersonic missiles launched from MiG-31K fighters, Iskander-M short-range ballistic missiles, Kh-101 cruise missiles, and Kh-31P anti-radar munitions. They targeted Ukraine's air defense systems, command bunkers, fuel depots, and transport hubs. The aim to show that while drones may disrupt Russia still decides the tempo of destruction. Ukraine's air defense could only intercept 5 of the 33. That's a success rate of just 2%. For comparison, during the 1st of June assault, Ukraine intercepted only 3 out of 27, and even lower 7%. But the real shock wasn't just in percentages, it was in the names and numbers. 16 Iskander-M missiles were fired at 5 key provinces: Kyiv, Chernihiv, Vinnytsia, Zhytomyr, and Poltava. All 16 struck their intended targets. In Rivne, 3 Kinzhal missiles broke through Ukrainian defenses, entirely vaporizing a known military depot near Demidivka. Meanwhile, 7 Kh-101 missiles were fired toward the Rivne and Dubno region. 4 were intercepted, 3 hit. Odessa wasn't spared either. 4 Kh-22 cruise missiles slammed into Zemini Island, all found their mark. 2 Kh-31P missiles struck radar outposts in Dobroslav, Odessa region. 1 more Kh-31P hit. Lamanka, all passed through unscathed. The data speaks for itself. According to independent missile tracking groups cited by AMK Mapping, Ukraine had a 0% interception rate against hypersonic and ballistic threats in this strike. Their only success came with cruise missiles, specifically Kh-101, where they managed to stop 4 out of 7. Yes, Ukraine fired back. IRIS-T operators in the Zapad Brigade reportedly claimed they intercepted 8 missiles in 30 seconds. A stunning number, if true, but no independent sources confirmed the feat. Even the Wall Street Journal reported skepticism, citing a lack of telemetry or video evidence. Russia, in short, was reminding Kyiv of the basic equation: drones may cost less, but firepower still dictates terms. For every drone Ukraine builds, Russia has a warhead bigger, faster, and far more expensive. But while missiles rained down, Ukraine's eyes turned westward again, searching for lifelines that were no longer guaranteed. By mid-June, after the skies lit up with missiles and debris, a quieter drama unfolded behind diplomatic curtains. Ukraine's once steady flow of Western support had started to wobble. President Zelensky made public appeals urging the U.S. to fulfill its earlier promises. His key frustration, a shipment of over 20,000 anti-drone missiles once pledged to Ukraine, had been rerouted by the Trump administration to support U.S. forces in the Middle East, primarily to counter drone threats near Israel. Zelensky did not hide his disappointment. In multiple interviews, he warned that without these systems, Ukraine risked losing its edge. "We are facing major problems with enemy drones," he admitted, directly referencing the Shahed-class UAVs, also known as Gerin, 2 widely believed to be Iranian, designed in Russian, operated. Both Russia and Iran deny the connection, but on the battlefield, semantics mean little. Meanwhile, Europe stepped up, Germany sent additional IRIS-T batteries. Israel, under quiet arrangements, began transferring legacy Patriot systems, but neither side confirmed how many. Everything was done in shadows, signaling an alliance, growing cautious, perhaps even fatigued. Former U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, who once promised the 20,000 interceptors, was now silent. And with Trump back in political spotlight, new voices emerged, questioning the wisdom of long-term aid. Some in Washington argued that it might be time for Ukraine and Russia to fight a little more before sitting at the table. The Pentagon skipped key NATO coordination meetings. That silence echoed louder than any explosion. And while this played out in meeting rooms, Russia moved on the ground. On the 9th of June, Russian armored forces, specifically the 90th Guards Tank Division, launched a new offensive in Dnipro province. Ukrainian officials denied the success, but satellite imagery showed fresh tank tracks pushing past previous defensive lines. According to AFP analysis, Russia now controls over 89,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory, nearly 15% of the country. If you include Crimea, the figure rises to over 19%. Zelensky's battlefield is no longer just physical. It's political. And the biggest weapons in this phase are no longer drones or missiles, but promises, pipelines, and shifting alliances. And in the end, perhaps Douglas Macgregor was right. Protracted war benefits no one except those who sell the weapons. Ukraine's Operation Spider's Web may have been a tactical innovation, but it didn't rewrite the rules of war. Drones can puncture defenses, strike deep, and cause panic, but retaliation comes fast, and from a power still vastly superior in air and missile capability, the West cheers every Ukrainian drone strike, but grows hesitant to supply real defense. Meanwhile, Russia adapts, digs in, and escalates, and so we're left with this paradox. Victory now depends not on who hits hardest, but who holds out longest. As Douglas McGregor warned, protracted war benefits no one except those who sell the weapons. What comes next may not be decided in Kyiv or Washington, but in the muddy fields of Dnipro and in the minds of those still watching from the sidelines.